The words were stones in her throat, each one a jagged weight she had to force past the lump of grief forming there. "I can't do this, Damon!" His face, usually a mask of glacial control, a landscape of handsome, hard-carved plains, shattered. It was not a grand, dramatic breaking, but a subtle and far more devastating splintering of light in his dark eyes. The hand that had been tracing patterns on her back went still, the warmth of it turning to a brand. "Lena," he said, his voice a low rumble of disbelief, a sound that tried to wrap around her name and hold it fast, to keep it from floating away on the cold air of her declaration. She pulled back, the few inches of space between them feeling like a chasm. The opulent penthouse with its panoramic views of a city that glittered like scattered diamonds felt like a cage. A beautiful, gilded cage she had willingly walked into, mesmerized by the man who held the key. "I can't be this person," she whispered, her gaze falling from his face to the silk lapels of his impossibly expensive suit. "I can't be the woman who looks the other way. I can't be the queen of a kingdom built on this." She gestured vaguely at the wealth, the power, the unspoken violence that hummed beneath the floorboards of his entire world. His jaw tightened, the muscle there a hard knot of denial. He reached for her, his movements slow, deliberate, as if she were a wild thing he was afraid of startling. "We can build a different kingdom." The hope in his voice was a knife twisting in her gut, because she wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But she had seen the darkness in his father's eyes, heard the casual cruelty in the stories his associates told. It was a legacy written in blood, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it would stain her too. "No," she said, the word a final, brittle thing. "You can't. And I can't watch you try." She turned then, forcing her legs to move, to carry her away from the only man who had ever made her feel truly seen, truly safe, even as he was the source of her greatest danger. Every step toward the door was an act of self-immolation. She did not look back, she could not, because if she did, she knew she would never leave. 3 months earlier, Damon Volkov had not known what it felt like to want for anything. Not truly. He desired things, a company, a rival's territory, a piece of art, and he acquired them. The process was transactional, a simple exertion of will and resources. It was as reflexive and unthinking as breathing. Women were no different. They were drawn to the gravitational pull of his name, his face, his fortune. They were beautiful, temporary distractions, and he never mistook them for anything more. He was a man entombed in power, the lonely king of an empire built by his father, Dmitri, an empire of shadows and sharp edges that passed for legitimate business. Damon ran it with a ruthless efficiency that had earned his father's grudging respect. He was decisive, intense, and utterly alone, a state he had long ago accepted as the price of the Volkov name. Then he walked into a second-rate coffee shop on a rain-slicked Tuesday afternoon, and the world tilted on its axis. He was only there because his driver had been caught in a protest-related gridlock, and his usual meeting spot was inaccessible. Annoyance was a low-grade hum beneath his skin. His lieutenant, Marco, a man whose loyalty was as solid as the reinforced concrete of their downtown headquarters, was speaking beside him, but the words were a meaningless drone. Damon's gaze swept the small, crowded space, dismissing it all. The cloying smell of burnt coffee, the saccharine pop music, the clusters of students hunched over laptops. And then his eyes landed on her. She was behind the counter, her brow furrowed in concentration as she wrestled with a steaming wand. An unruly curl had escaped her messy bun and clung to her temple. She wore a faded band t-shirt under her stained apron, and her hands, though quick, were not delicate. They were working hands. There was nothing about her that fit the mold of women he usually noticed. She was not polished or perfect or poised, and she was the most captivating thing he had ever seen. She blew the errant curl from her face with a puff of exasperated air, and her eyes, the color of warm honey, flicked up, meeting his across the room. It was not a spark. It was a cataclysm. For a full, suspended second, the noise of the cafe disappeared. The clatter of ceramic, the hiss of the espresso machine, Marco's voice, it all vanished into a vacuum. There was only the woman with the honey eyes and the defiant set of her chin. He felt it like a physical blow, a punch to the chest that knocked the air from his lungs and rearranged something fundamental inside him. It was a feeling so alien, so powerful, it bordered on supernatural. A voice behind her broke the spell. "Lena, order up for table 5. Lena. Her name settled into his mind, not as a piece of information, but as a brand. He watched her turn away, her movements efficient and devoid of grace, yet utterly mesmerizing. He felt a sudden, primal urge that stunned him with its intensity. Mine. The thought was not a wish, it was a pronouncement. Sir? Marco's voice cut through the fog. Damon, did you hear me? Damon blinked, the cafe rushing back in with a roar. He turned his head slowly to look at his second-in-command. Find out everything there is to know about her. Marco followed his gaze to the woman now wiping down the counter. He raised a skeptical eyebrow. Her? The barista? Her, Damon repeated, his voice flat, absolute. It was not a request. It was the first move in a campaign he had, in the span of a single heartbeat, decided he would win. The annoyance he'd felt just moments before had been burned away, replaced by a singular, all-consuming focus. He did not know her name was Lena Jones, that she worked 2 jobs to cover her rent and her mother's medical bills, that she dreamed of being a graphic designer but was too pragmatic to chase it. He knew nothing about her, but in that frozen moment, he knew his life, the one he had so carefully controlled and curated, had just ended. And a new one that revolved around a woman in a stained apron, had just begun. Lena Jones felt the stare like a change in atmospheric pressure. It was a heavy, unnerving weight on the back of her neck, and when she looked up, she found its source immediately. He stood out in the cramped, shabby cafe like a panther in a petting zoo. He was tall, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it probably cost more than her car, and he was staring at her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. It was the kind of stare that didn't just see you, it assessed you, cataloged you, and laid some strange, unspoken claim. She was used to getting hit on at work. It was part of the territory, but this was different. This was predatory. She broke the stare first, turning back to the neurotic espresso machine with a scowl. Creep. But she could still feel his eyes on her as she worked, a silent, unnerving pressure. She was relieved when he and the other man with him, a bodyguard, probably, given his build and watchful eyes, finally left. She did not give him another thought. Until the next day. He was back. This time he sat at a small table near the window, a cup of coffee he never touched sitting in front of him. He just watched her. For 2 hours. Lena's best friend and roommate, Chloe, who had stopped by on her lunch break, noticed immediately. Okay, who is the handsome, terrifying Bond villain in the corner, and why is he staring at you like he wants to acquire you for his private collection? Chloe whispered, leaning over the counter. I have no idea, Lena muttered, aggressively wiping a clean spot on the counter. He was here yesterday, too. It's freaking me out. Freaking you out? Lena, the man is a walking god of finance and probably organized crime. He looks like he smells of money and danger. At least go ask him if he wants a refill. I'd rather not, Lena said, her jaw tight. She hated feeling like a specimen under a microscope. The 3rd day, he was there again, and the 4th. On the 5th day, Lena had had enough. Her shift was over, and he was still there, a sentinel in cashmere watching. Her patience, already worn thin by a faulty dishwasher and a string of rude customers, finally snapped. She untied her apron, tossed it in the laundry bin, and marched straight to his table. She planted her hands on her hips. Okay, what is your deal? She demanded. Damon Volkov looked up at her, and for the first time she saw his eyes up close. They were darker than she'd thought, a deep, turbulent gray. and they held a flicker of something that looked surprisingly like surprise. "My deal?" he asked, his voice a low, smooth baritone that did irritating things to her nerve endings. "Yes. You've been sitting here for 5 days, staring at me. It's creepy. Whatever you're selling, I'm not buying. Whatever you're looking for, I don't have it. So, can you please go be handsome and menacing somewhere else?" A slow smile spread across his lips. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a predator that had just watched its prey walk right up and bite it. It was devastating, a smile like a punch to the chest. "I'm not selling anything," he said, "and I've already found what I'm looking for." His gaze was so direct, so potent, that Lena felt a hot blush creep up her neck. This was a mistake. She should have just ignored him. "Right. Well, this is a place of business, not a zoo. So if you're done with your coffee, the table is needed," she said, gesturing vaguely at the half-empty cafe. He stood up and she had to crane her neck to look at him. He was even taller than she'd thought, a mountain of expensive wool and quiet power. He dwarfed her, and for a second, a primal sliver of fear shot through her. "My name is Damon," he said, his voice softer now. "I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable." He didn't sound apologetic at all. He sounded impossibly sure of himself. "Lena," she supplied against her better judgment. "And you have. So, apology accepted. Goodbye." She turned to walk away, but his voice stopped her. "Have dinner with me." It wasn't a question. It was a command wrapped in the politest of silks. Lena laughed, a short, sharp, incredulous sound. She turned back. "No." His expression didn't change. The smile was gone, replaced by that unnerving intensity. "Why not?" "Because I don't know you. Because you're a stranger who has been stalking me at my job. Because men who look like you don't ask out women who look like me unless they want something I'm not willing to give." Her principles were her armor, the only thing she truly owned. "And what do I look like?" he asked, a genuine curiosity in his tone. "Trouble," she said, the word coming out before she could stop it. "You look like a whole world of trouble." He considered her words for a moment. "I can be," he admitted. "But not for you. Dinner, Lena. One night." "No," she repeated, her voice firm. She had to be firm. This man was a rip current, and she could feel the pull of him even now. He was everything her mother had ever warned her against. Too much money, too much confidence, too much danger. "Tomorrow, then," he said, as if she hadn't spoken. He placed a few crisp $100 bills on the table, a tip that could cover her electric bill for 3 months, and walked out of the cafe. Lena stared at the money, her heart pounding. It felt like a down payment. Chloe was beside her in an instant. "You said no to that? Are you insane? He looks like he could solve all our problems with a single phone call." "He looks like he could create 1,000 more with that same call," Lena countered, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. She knew, with a sinking feeling, that he would be back. Tomorrow. The flowers arrived the next morning. Not a bouquet, a deluge. The entire front of the coffee shop was filled with so many white roses that it looked like a funeral parlor. It took 3 delivery men to haul them all in. There was no card. There didn't need to be. Lena was mortified. Her boss was thrilled. "This is amazing for business," he'd chirped, arranging the vases around the shop. Lena spent the whole day fuming, her cheeks burning with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. This wasn't romantic. It was a power play, a display. It was a way of saying, "I can do this. I can overwhelm you." He did not appear at the cafe that day, but when she got home that night, exhausted and smelling faintly of roses, a long black car was parked at the curb of her rundown apartment building. It was so out of place it looked like a spaceship had landed. Damon leaned against it, a silhouette of impossible elegance against the graffiti-scarred brick. Lena stopped dead on the sidewalk. "You have got to be kidding me." "I was told you don't like roses," he said, his voice calm and even. "How did you know where I live?" she asked, her voice sharp as broken glass. Fear and fury warred within her. "I know a lot of things, Lena," he said simply. He pushed off the car and took a step toward her. Is this legal? What you're doing? A flicker of something amusement, exasperation, crossed his face. Probably not, but I'm not a patient man. Well, I'm a woman who values her privacy and not being stalked. So please leave me alone. She tried to push past him, but he moved with her, blocking her path to the apartment door. One dinner, he repeated, his voice low and persuasive. That's all I ask. If after that you still want me to leave you alone, I will. Lena looked into his eyes and saw a sincerity that startled her. It was buried deep beneath layers of control and command, but it was there, a raw, desperate sincerity. She also saw the lie. He wouldn't leave her alone. He couldn't. It was written all over him. But he would try, and the effort would probably tear him apart. She was so tired of struggling, tired of being invisible. And here was a man who saw her so intensely it was almost painful. Fine, she bit out, the word tasting like surrender. One dinner. But I pick the place. Victory flared in his eyes, hot and immediate. Done. And you're paying, she added, a pathetic attempt to regain some semblance of control. He actually smiled then, a genuine, breathtaking smile that reached his eyes and lit them from within. I would be offended if you thought otherwise. The dinner was a disaster of clashing worlds. Lena, in a defiant gesture, had chosen a noisy, cheap Thai restaurant in her neighborhood. She arrived in jeans and her favorite worn-out sweater. Damon arrived in another flawless suit, stepping out of his black car and looking utterly, beautifully incongruous amongst the neon signs and budget storefronts. He didn't even blink. He treated the flustered hostess with a grave courtesy that had her stammering, and he navigated the sticky tables as if he were walking through a palace. He didn't belong here, but he acted as though he belonged everywhere. Happy? She asked sarcastically as they sat down. I'm with you, he said, his gaze fixed on her. So, yes. The simple, earnest answer disarmed her completely. She spent the rest of the meal on the defensive, firing sarcastic questions and observations at him like arrows. He deflected them all with an unnerving calm, answering her questions about his work with vague, polished phrases. Family business, investments, global logistics. He was a fortress, but she found a crack. What's that? She asked, nodding toward his left hand, which rested on the table. A thin, white scar cut across his knuckles, stark against his tanned skin. He glanced down, his expression hardening for a fraction of a second. A disagreement. Looks like you lost, she quipped, trying to keep her tone light. He looked back up at her, his gray eyes suddenly cold and ancient. The other man lost more. A chill went down Lena's spine. The words hung in the air between them, a quiet testament to the trouble she had so accurately predicted. This was not a man who dealt in simple disagreements. This was a man who dealt in consequences. After dinner, he insisted on walking her to her door. Under the flickering fluorescent light of her apartment building's hallway, the tension between them was a thick, palpable thing. So, she said, her back against the door, you've had your dinner. Now you're supposed to leave me alone. Is that what you want? He asked, his voice a low murmur. He was standing too close, his heat and his scent, something clean and expensive like sandalwood and cold air, enveloping her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her brain screamed yes. Yes, this is dangerous. Yes, you need to run. But her body, her treacherous, lonely body, leaned ever so slightly toward him. She started, but the word died in her throat. He knew. Of course, he knew. He saw the conflict in her eyes, the war between her head and her heart. He lifted a hand, not to touch her, but to brace it against the door next to her head. The move was possessive, caging her in without laying a single finger on her. I will see you again, Lena, he said. It was a promise, a vow. Then he straightened up, turned, and walked away, his footsteps silent on the linoleum floor. Lena slid into her apartment, her back hitting the door as it clicked shut. She was breathing as if she'd just run a marathon. Chloe was on the couch, waiting. "Well? Did you survive the date with the Dark Lord?" Lena just shook her head, a dazed, helpless gesture. "I think," she whispered mostly to herself, "I'm in a lot of trouble." The trouble deepened over the next few weeks. Damon was relentless, but he was also learning. He stopped the grand, overwhelming gestures and instead inserted himself into her life in smaller, more insidious ways. He'd have coffee delivered to her second job, a thankless data entry position in a sterile office park. He'd be waiting outside when her shift ended, not with the imposing black car, but on foot, offering to walk her to the bus stop. He was weaving himself into the fabric of her days, and she was letting him. She told herself it was just to see what would happen. She told herself she was in control. She was lying. He made her laugh with his dry, self-deprecating observations about the world she inhabited, a world he was clearly studying like an anthropologist. He listened, truly listened, when she talked about her dreams of design, his intense focus making her feel like the most interesting person in the world. She was beginning to see the man beneath the armor, a lonely, burdened figure who looked at her with a hunger that was more than just physical. It was a hunger for the light and life he saw in her. One Saturday, he took her to the city's most exclusive shopping district, a street lined with boutiques whose window displays cost more than her annual salary. "This isn't my world, Damon," she said, feeling self-conscious in her worn jeans and comfortable but scuffed-up flats. "I want it to be," he said simply, taking her hand. His touch was warm and firm, a silent declaration of ownership that she no longer fought. They wandered into a shoe boutique that was all white marble and hushed reverence. Shoes were displayed on pedestals like works of art. A saleswoman with a painfully chic haircut looked down her nose at Lena's shoes and immediately dismissed them. Lena felt a familiar sting of humiliation, but she lifted her chin. She was here with Damon. For some reason, that felt like its own kind of armor. Then, the bell above the door chimed and a woman glided in. She was tall, impossibly thin, and exuded an aura of bored, expensive beauty. Her eyes, cold and blue, swept the room and landed on Damon. A slow, predatory smile formed on her perfectly painted lips. "Damon, darling," she purred, her voice like honey laced with poison. She walked over and kissed the air beside his cheek, her eyes never leaving Lena. "I didn't know you shopped in places with public access." Damon's expression went rigid. "Isabella," he said, his tone arctic, "what are you doing here?" "Shopping, of course," the woman Isabella said. Her gaze dropped pointedly to Lena's feet. She let out a small, cruel tinkle of a laugh. "And you've brought a friend. How charitable of you. Are those shoes vintage?" The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to inflict maximum damage. Lena felt her face flush with heat. Her first instinct was to snap back with something vicious, to defend her pride. Her shoes were cheap because she was poor, not because she was a charity case. They were a symbol of her struggle, her reality, and this woman was mocking it. But before she could speak, Damon moved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cause a scene. He simply turned his head slightly, his gaze falling on the store manager who was hovering nearby, drawn by the presence of Isabella, a known big spender. Damon's voice was quiet, almost conversational, but it cut through the air like a razor. "How much?" he asked. The manager blinked, confused. "Sir? For which pair?" Damon's eyes, chips of gray ice, met the manager's. "Not the shoes," he said, his voice dropping even lower, laced with a terrifying calm. "For the boutique, the entire store. I'm buying it." Silence. Isabella's smug smile froze on her face, then melted away into disbelief. The manager's jaw dropped. Lena's heart stopped beating altogether. This wasn't a gesture. It was an execution. It was an act of such staggering, absolute power that it sucked all the air out of the room. He was erasing the scene of the insult. He was not just defending her. He was demonstrating in the most brutal way possible the chasm that existed between his world and everyone else's. "Sir, I don't think it's for sale," the manager stammered. Damon pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. "My legal team will be in touch within the hour with an offer your owner will not refuse. Have your inventory lists ready." He put the phone away and finally looked at Isabella, his expression one of utter dismissal. "Now get out of my store!" Isabella stared at him, her face a mask of fury and humiliation. She shot Lena a look of pure venom before turning on her stiletto heel and storming out of the shop, the bell chiming furiously in her wake. Damon then turned to Lena. The cold fury in his eyes softened as it landed on her, replaced by that familiar, intense focus. He seemed to see, for the first time, the scuffed toes of her flats, the source of the insult. He knelt. Right there, on the cold marble floor of the boutique he had just purchased, Damon Volkov knelt in front of her. He gently took her foot in his hand, his thumb stroking over the worn canvas. The gesture was so unexpected, so intimate, it stole her breath. "No one," he said, his voice thick with a promise that was more terrifying than any threat, "will ever make you feel small again." He looked up at her, and in his eyes she saw it all, the possessiveness, the darkness, the violence he was capable of. But beneath it she saw a raw, aching vulnerability, a desperate need to protect her, to cherish her, to place her on a pedestal and keep the entire world at bay. And in that moment, kneeling on the floor of his newest acquisition, surrounded by shoes that cost a fortune, all Lena could think was that she was falling. No, she had already fallen, head first and with no safety net in sight. The aftermath of the boutique incident was a turning point. It had terrified her, but it had also thrilled her in a way she was ashamed to admit. No one had ever stood up for her like that. The sheer scale of his reaction was breathtaking. Chloe's words echoed in her mind, a prince or a psycho, or both. Lena was beginning to think it was definitely both. Damon seemed to understand he had shown her too much of the wolf. In the following weeks, he was a perfect gentleman, the prince. He took her to quiet dinners at restaurants he'd booked entirely for them. They walked through parks after dark, his presence a silent shield that kept the city's dangers at bay. He never pushed for more than a chaste kiss at her door, but the kisses were deep and searching, filled with a banked passion that promised an inferno. He opened up, but only in slivers. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was a teenager, a beautiful, sad woman who had wilted in the cold shadow of the Volkov Empire. He spoke of the crushing weight of his family's expectations, the legacy he felt chained to. He never used words like crime or illegal, but the truth was a ghost in the room, a shape she could almost make out in the dark. Lena found herself falling deeper in love, not just with the powerful man who could buy the world for her, but with the lonely man who seemed to need her to save him from it. Her wariness was being eroded by a tide of genuine affection. She was starting to believe in his vision of a different kingdom, one they could build together. Her friend Chloe remained the voice of cynical reason. "Okay, so he's a gentleman stalker with a heart of gold and a black Amex. It's still weird, Lena. Men like that don't just exist. There's always a catch." "Maybe he's the exception," Lena argued, but the words felt flimsy even to her. Her mother, Sarah, was less philosophical. Lena had made the mistake of mentioning Damon during one of their weekly phone calls, carefully omitting the more alarming details. "A rich man, Lena? You be careful," her mother had warned, her voice tight with a lifetime of distrust for the wealthy. "They break things, and they never have to pay to fix them, especially when the things they break are people like us." Lena had brushed it off, but the words stuck with her. The catch Chloe had warned her about arrived on a crisp autumn evening. Damon picked her up in his car, but instead of turning toward the city, he drove north, out of the urban sprawl and into the rolling hills of the countryside. "Where are we going?" Lena asked. a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. "I want you to see where I grew up," he said, his eyes on the road. "There are things you need to know. Things you need to see." An hour later, they turned onto a private road marked by a formidable wrought iron gate that swung open silently as they approached. They drove for another mile through a dark, ancient forest before the trees cleared, revealing the Volkov estate. It wasn't a house. It was a fortress, a sprawling stone manor that looked like it had been ripped from the pages of a Gothic novel. It was magnificent and deeply menacing, its windows like dark, watchful eyes. This was not the home of a man who dealt in global logistics. This was the home of a king, or a warlord. Marco, his ever-present lieutenant, met them at the door. He gave Lena a brief, unreadable nod. "Damon, your father is in the study. He's waiting." Damon's jaw tightened. "Of course he is." He took Lena's hand, his grip a little too tight. "Come on." He led her through a grand hall with a soaring ceiling and walls lined with stern-faced portraits of his ancestors. The air was cold and smelled of old money, polish, and something else. Something like iron and secrets. The study was a cavernous room paneled in dark wood, dominated by a massive fireplace where a log fire crackled. A man stood with his back to them, staring into the flames. He was older than Damon, but he had the same tall, powerful build, the same air of absolute command. When he turned, Lena felt a jolt of pure, undiluted fear. It was Damon's face, but stripped of all warmth, all vulnerability. This was Dmitry Volkov, the patriarch. His eyes, a paler, colder gray than his son's, swept over Lena with blatant dismissal. "So," Dmitry said, his voice a gravelly rumble, "this is the distraction." "This is Lena," Damon said, his voice dangerously quiet. "She is not a distraction. She is with me." Dmitry let out a short, humorless laugh. "With you? A girl like that? She is a weakness, Damon, a vulnerability our enemies will exploit before the week is out. You, of all people, should know that." "She is not your concern, father," Damon bit back, stepping slightly in front of Lena, shielding her. "Everything you do is my concern," Dmitry countered, taking a step forward. "You are the head of this family. You carry my name. You cannot afford the luxury of sentiment. Send her away. Find a woman from one of the other families. Someone who understands our world, who strengthens our position." "No," Damon said. The word a stone wall. Dmitry's cold gaze settled on Lena again. "He thinks he can protect you, little girl, but he can't. This world will chew you up and spit you out. It has no place for whatever you are." The raw contempt in his voice was like a physical blow. Lena felt herself shrink, all her bravado, all her defiance, withering under the chilling force of his presence. This was the source of the darkness in Damon. This was the legacy he was chained to. Damon took her arm. "We're leaving." He pulled her from the room, his movements stiff with fury. He didn't speak as he led her back out to the car. The silence was thick with everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. He drove them to a scenic overlook, a cliff edge that offered a breathtaking view of the distant city lights. He killed the engine, and the silence descended again, heavier this time. Lena finally found her voice, though it was small and shaky. "What is this, Damon? What is your family business?" Damon stared out the windshield, his profile etched against the dark sky. He looked tired, older. "My family," he began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, "has been in this country for 3 generations. We didn't come here with money. We took it. We built an empire, first with smuggling, then extortion, then other things. We have a name for it in the old country. Bratva." The word hung in the air. Lena had read it in newspapers, seen it in movies. The Russian mob. Her blood ran cold. It wasn't just morally gray. It wasn't just sharp edges. It was this, criminal, violent. "My father ran it with an iron fist," Damon continued, his voice a dead monotone. "And when he decided he was done, it passed to me. I am the head of the Volkov organization. It is not a choice. It is a birthright. A curse. He finally turned to look at her, his eyes dark pools of misery and confession. The money, the power, the cars, the clothes, it's all built on a foundation of fear and violence. It's ugly, and it's corrupt, and it's my life. This is the truth of me, Lena. This is the trouble you saw from the very beginning. Lena stared at him, her mind reeling. The flowers, the stalking, the way he'd bought the boutique, his father's chilling words. It all snapped into a horrifying, perfect focus. He wasn't a prince or a psycho. He was a kingpin, a gangster. Her mother's voice whispered in her ear. They break things. I love you, he said, the words raw and desperate, as if he were trying to use them as a shield against the truth he'd just unleashed. I have loved you since the moment I saw you in that coffee shop. You are the only clean, good thing in my entire world. He reached for her, but Lena flinched back, her hand flying to her mouth. The movement, small and instinctive, was like a knife to his heart. She saw the pain flash across his face, so sharp and profound it almost made her cry out. But the fear was greater than the pity. The chasm between their worlds had just opened up at her feet, and it was 1,000 miles wide and bottomless. She loved him. God help her, she loved him. But his world was a nightmare, and she was terrified it was about to swallow her whole. The drive back to her apartment was a study in suffocating silence. Damon's confession lay between them like a corpse. Lena sat rigid, staring out the window at the blurred city lights, her mind a maelstrom of love and terror. Every romantic moment they had shared was now tainted, overlaid with the grim reality of his world. The safety she felt with him was an illusion, bought and paid for with the very violence that now threatened to drown her. When he pulled up to her building, he didn't get out. He just sat, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. The scar she'd once asked about seemed more prominent than ever, a brand of his world. Lena, he said, his voice hoarse. Say something. She couldn't. What was there to say? It's okay that you're a crime boss. I don't mind the extortion and violence. The sarcasm that was once her shield felt pathetic and useless now. She fumbled with the door handle. I need to think. She practically fell out of the car and ran for the security of her building, not looking back. She heard the car door open behind her, heard him call her name, but she didn't stop. She couldn't face him. She couldn't face the choice he represented. She spent 2 days in a self-imposed prison in her small apartment. She didn't answer her phone when it rang, knowing it was him. She called in sick to both of her jobs. Chloe found her on the second night, huddled on the couch under a blanket, staring at nothing. Okay, what did the Dark Lord do? Chloe asked gently, sitting beside her. Lena told her everything, the estate, the terrifying father, the confession, the word bratva. Chloe listened without interrupting, her usual flippancy gone, replaced by a grave seriousness. When Lena finished, her voice a ragged whisper, Chloe was quiet for a long time. Wow, she finally said. I was joking when I called him a psycho crime boss. I didn't think he was an actual, literal, card-carrying crime boss. She shook her head. Oh, Lena, what are you going to do? I don't know, Lena cried, the tears finally coming. I love him, Chloe. I really, truly love him. But how can I be with him? How can I live in that world? His father was right. It would destroy me. Then you know what you have to do, Chloe said softly, her voice full of a sadness that mirrored Lena's own. You have to leave him. For your own sake. The words were a death sentence, but Lena knew they were true. Her principles, her core sense of right and wrong were all she had. To stay with Damon would mean sacrificing them on the altar of her love for him. It would mean looking the other way. It would mean becoming a part of the darkness. The decision was the most painful thing she had ever done. It felt like tearing off a limb. She finally answered his call on the 3rd day. His voice was raw with relief and anxiety. Lena, thank God. I'm coming over. No, she said, her own voice sounding hollow and distant. "Meet me at your apartment. In an hour!" She needed to do this on his territory, in the gilded cage. She needed to remind herself of what she was walking away from and why. And so she found herself standing in his penthouse, the glittering city spread out below them, delivering the words that would break them both. "I can't do this, Damon." She watched his face shatter, saw the desperate hope in his eyes as he pleaded with her. "We can build a different kingdom." The words were a siren song, promising a future she desperately wanted but knew could never be. Her love for him was an anchor, but his world was a storm that would sink them both. "No," she said, the word a final, brittle thing. "You can't, and I can't watch you try." She turned and walked away, each step a fresh agony. She felt his gaze on her back, a physical weight of despair. She heard the sound of glass shattering behind her just as the elevator doors slid shut. A vase, a glass, a life. But she didn't flinch. She had made her choice. She had chosen herself. It felt exactly like dying. Damon watched the elevator doors close, severing her from his sight. For a moment, he simply stood there, frozen in the echoing silence of the penthouse. The space, once a symbol of his power, now felt vast and empty, a mausoleum for a future that had just died. The sound of shattering glass had been his hand sweeping a crystal decanter from a nearby table. A pointless, impotent burst of the violence that was his birthright. The violence that had just cost him everything. He sank onto the sofa, the place where she had sat just weeks before, her laughter echoing in his memory. The memory was a torment. He dropped his head into his hands, the smooth, expensive fabric of his suit feeling like a straitjacket. His father's words replayed in his mind. She is a weakness. He had been wrong. She was not his weakness. She was his strength. She was the anchor that had held him steady, the light that had kept the encroaching darkness of his world at bay. And now she was gone. He had thought his power was absolute. He could buy companies, crush rivals, bend the city to his will, but he could not make one good, principled woman stay. His power, the very thing that defined him, was the poison that had driven her away. The days that followed were a gray, featureless landscape of misery. He went through the motions of his life with a cold, mechanical precision. He ran his empire, but the thrill of it was gone. The deals, the acquisitions, the exercise of power, it was all hollow, meaningless ash in his mouth. He was more ruthless in his business dealings, his temper shorter, his decisions colder. His men whispered that the old Damon was back, the one who existed before the girl. They were wrong. That Damon had been merely empty. This version was broken. He found himself staring at a single shoe. It was from the boutique he'd bought. He'd had the manager send over a pair of every style in Lena's size, a ridiculous, extravagant gesture he'd planned to surprise her with. Now the boxes were stacked in a spare room, a monument to his failure. He held a simple, elegant flat, the kind of thing she would have actually worn. He traced its lines with his finger, the soft leather a poor substitute for her skin. Marco watched him with worried eyes. "She's not coming back, Damon." "I know," Damon said, his voice flat. "Your father is pleased. He says the family is stronger without the distraction." A cold rage, potent and pure, surged through Damon. He looked up at Marco, his eyes blazing. "My father is a fool. He mistakes fear for strength. He has no idea what he has cost me, what he has cost this family." In that moment, something shifted inside him. The grief, the despair. It didn't disappear, but it crystallized into a new, hard shape. A purpose. Lena had left because of what he was, because of the world his father had built and passed down to him. She believed he couldn't change it. She believed he was trapped. He would prove her wrong. He wouldn't do it to win her back. He told himself that at least. He would do it because she had shown him what was possible. She had shown him a different way to be, a different kind of man to be. She had lit a candle in the suffocating darkness of his life, and even though she was gone, the light remained, a tiny flickering flame of an idea. He couldn't just walk away from the Volkov Empire. It would mean a war he might not win, and it would put a target on the backs of everyone he cared about, including Lena. But he didn't have to walk away. He could change it, from the inside out. He stood up, placing the shoe carefully back in its box. He looked at Marco, a new, cold fire in his eyes. "Get the lawyers," he said. "Get the accountants. Get our top people in every division. I want a full audit of every asset, every holding, every contract. I want to know exactly where the rot is." Marco stared at him, a slow understanding dawning on his face. "What are you going to do?" "A house cleaning," Damon said, his voice deadly serious. "We're going legitimate. All of it. We're selling off the shadows and moving everything into the light." Marco's eyes widened. This was not a plan. It was a revolution. It was an attack on the very foundation of the Volkov legacy. It would be a bloody, brutal, internal war. Their father would fight him. Their old allies would turn on them. "It will be dangerous," Marco said, stating the obvious. "I know," Damon said. "But this life, this kingdom of fear, it's not worth ruling without her in it. If I can't have her, I will at least become the man she thought I could be." It was a grand gesture of the highest order, not buying a store, but tearing down an empire and rebuilding it in a new image, an image worthy of her. It was an impossible task, and he would not fail. Lena's life returned to its previous shape, but it no longer fit. The routine that had once been a comfort, the early mornings at the cafe, the mind-numbing afternoons of data entry, the exhausted evenings with Chloe, now felt like a punishment. The world, which had briefly exploded into vibrant, terrifying color, had reverted to monochrome. She was safe. She was principled. She was miserable. Everywhere she looked, there were ghosts of him. The coffee shop where he'd first seen her, the corner where his black car had waited, the Thai restaurant where he'd looked so out of place and so perfect. She saw tall men in expensive suits, and her heart would leap into her throat, only to plummet back to earth in disappointment. "You look terrible," Chloe told her one evening, about a month after the breakup. "I feel terrible," Lena admitted, pushing her uneaten food around her plate. "Do you regret it?" Lena thought for a long moment. "I regret that I had to do it. I don't regret doing it." She looked at her friend, her eyes welling up. "How can I miss someone so much when being with him was so wrong?" "Because you didn't love the crime boss," Chloe said gently. "You loved the man who was trapped inside him, the man who knelt on a marble floor because someone was mean to you." Lena's mother called, full of "I told you so's" disguised as concern. "I knew he was no good, honey. A man with that much money is never clean. You're better off. You'll find a nice, normal boy." Lena knew her mother meant well, but the words were like salt in a gaping wound. She didn't want a nice, normal boy. She wanted the intense, lonely, dangerous man who had seen her, truly seen her, and had wanted to give her the world. She threw herself into her work, picking up extra shifts, saving money with a feverish intensity. She started working on her design portfolio again, the creative act a small solace in the vast emptiness of her evenings. She was building a life for herself, brick by painful brick. It was a good life, a respectable life, and it felt like no life at all. News of Damon's world occasionally pierced her self-imposed exile. She saw a headline online one day. "Volkov Corp announces massive divestment, shifts to tech and renewable energy." The article spoke of a radical restructuring, a move away from traditional logistics and private security toward legitimate, publicly traded sectors. It quoted financial analysts who were baffled by the move, calling it a risky, almost reckless liquidation of profitable assets. Lena's heart pounded as she read it. We can build a different kingdom. Was this what he meant? Was he actually trying? She dismissed the thought as a foolish fantasy. It was probably just a business strategy. a way to launder his reputation, not his soul. It had nothing to do with her, but she couldn't stop herself from looking. She started following the business news, tracking the seismic shifts in the Volkov empire. More articles appeared. Volkov Corp was selling its shipping interests, closing its security firm. There were rumors of internal strife, of a power struggle between Damon and his father's old guard. One brief, buried report mentioned a violent altercation at a Volkov-owned warehouse, resulting in the arrest of several longtime associates. Dmitry Volkov was reported to have retired to his country estate due to ill health. Lena read between the lines. Damon was at war. He was at war with his own family, his own history. He was burning his father's kingdom to the ground, and she knew with a certainty that made her ache that he was doing it for her. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. He was making an impossible choice. He was changing. 6 months after she had walked away, she came home from work to find a simple, cream-colored envelope slipped under her door. There was no return address. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was not a letter, but a business prospectus. It was for a new graphic design firm, LJ Designs. The funding was secured. The office space was leased. The mission statement was about empowering independent artists. At the bottom of the last page, there was a single handwritten line. "A new kingdom needs a queen." Lena sank to the floor, the papers clutched in her hand, and sobbed. They were tears of grief for the months they had lost and tears of a fragile, burgeoning hope. He had not just changed his world. He was inviting her to build her own. The address for LJ Designs was in a newly renovated arts district, a part of the city that was buzzing with creative energy. Lena stood across the street, staring at the storefront. It was a beautiful space, with a floor-to-ceiling glass front and a simple, elegant sign bearing the name he had given it. Her name. It was the grandest gesture of all, more than the flowers, more than the boutique. He hadn't just offered her a place in his world. He had built her a world of her own, a place where her dreams could take root. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she crossed the street and pushed open the door. The interior was a blank canvas, white walls, polished concrete floors, and stunning natural light. It was empty, waiting, except for him. He stood in the center of the room, not in one of his impeccable suits, but in dark trousers and a simple gray sweater. He looked thinner, and there were new lines of exhaustion around his eyes. The easy command was still there, but it was tempered by a deep weariness, and by a vulnerability that was now plain to see, no longer hidden beneath layers of armor. The scar on his knuckles seemed to have faded. They just looked at each other for a long moment, the silence stretching across the empty space. "You came," he said, his voice quiet, hoarse. "You built me a company, Damon," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "How could I not?" He took a hesitant step toward her. "It's not clean yet," he said, his eyes searching hers, desperate for her to understand. "The money, some of it, it's still from the old world. It takes time to untangle it all. But I'm doing it. I sold the shipping lines, the security firms, the things that were rotten. My father, he fought me. We're not speaking. Many of his men are gone. Some are in prison. It was a war, Lena." "I know," she said softly. "I read about it. I saw." He stopped a few feet from her, as if afraid to come any closer, as if he still believed he would taint her. "It's not enough, I know. I'm still me. I'm still Damon Volkov. But I'm trying to be a man you don't have to look away from." Tears streamed down Lena's face. The wall she had so carefully constructed around her heart, the wall of principle and self-preservation, crumbled into dust. He had done the impossible. He had heard her silent plea and had torn down his world in response. He hadn't just changed for her. He had changed because of her. "You idiot!" she sobbed, a raw, broken sound. She closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps, her hands coming up to cup his face. She could feel the rough stubble on his jaw, the warmth of his skin. "I loved you then, and I love you now." Relief washed over his face, so profound it was like watching a man who had been holding his breath for 6 months finally exhale. His own eyes glistened. "Lena," he breathed, his voice breaking on her name. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision, a desperate, hungry claiming that was 6 months in the making. It was all the pain of their separation, all the misery of their loneliness, all the hope of this new beginning poured into one frantic, beautiful moment. His arms wrapped around her, lifting her off her feet, holding her against him as if he would never let her go again. It was the kiss of a man who had fought a war and had just come home. She clung to him, her fingers tangled in his hair, kissing him back with all the love and longing she had kept locked away. It was a kiss of forgiveness, of acceptance, of a future she had never thought possible. When they finally broke apart, breathless and trembling, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want you," he whispered, the words a raw, repetitive affirmation. "I want you, in this life, in any life." "You have me," she answered, her voice steady and sure for the first time in months. "You have me." He looked around the empty space, at the white walls and the streams of sunlight. "Is it enough?" he asked. "Can we build a new kingdom here? A better one?" Lena smiled, a real, radiant smile that reached her eyes. She took his hand, her fingers lacing through his. "It's more than enough," she said. "It's everything." 1 year later, the sign for LJ Designs was a beacon in the arts district. The firm was thriving, representing a dozen talented young artists and designers, many of whom would have never gotten a break otherwise. Lena was not just the owner, she was the heart of the operation, her passion and her sharp eye for talent driving its success. She had found her purpose, not as a queen in someone else's kingdom, but as the architect of her own. Damon Volkov was still a name that commanded respect and a healthy dose of fear in the business world, but the nature of that world had changed. The Volkov Corporation was a leader in green technology and innovative software, its stock soaring. The shadows of its past were long, but they were receding. Damon ran his new empire with the same decisive intensity, but it was now directed toward building, not breaking. The darkness in him hadn't vanished. It was part of him, but it was now balanced by a profound light. Her light. They lived not in the menacing stone fortress of his father, nor in the cold, lonely penthouse, but in a brownstone on a quiet, tree-lined street. It was a home filled with warmth and art and the sound of laughter. Dmitry Volkov remained in self-imposed exile, a bitter old dragon guarding a pile of scorched memories. He and Damon had never reconciled. It was a wound that Damon carried, a sad but necessary cost of his transformation. One evening, Lena was sketching in her home studio when Damon came in. He stood in the doorway, watching her, that same intense focus in his eyes that she'd first seen in the coffee shop. But now, it wasn't predatory. It was adoring. "What are you working on?" he asked softly. She smiled, turning the sketchbook toward him. It was a design for a new line of shoes. They were elegant, practical, and beautiful. They were shoes a woman could run the world in. He walked over and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder to look at her work. His presence was a comfort, a solid, grounding force. "They're beautiful," he murmured into her hair. "Just like you." She leaned back against his chest, content. She had not lost herself in his world. She had found a new, stronger version of herself, and he had become a better man beside her. They had saved each other. Their love story wasn't a fairy tale. It was born of stalking and power plays, of secrets and fear. It had been tested by a painful separation and forged in the fire of a self-waged war. It was messy and complicated and real, and it was theirs. A new kingdom, built not on fear, but on a redemption so profound it had reshaped 2 worlds. It was built on love. This story teaches us a powerful lesson about the nature of change and the redemptive power of love. It shows that true strength isn't about imposing your will on the world, but about having the courage to change your world for the better, inspired by someone you love. Damon's journey from a man trapped by a dark legacy to one who actively dismantles it for the sake of love is a testament to the idea that no one is beyond redemption if they are willing to do the hard work of becoming worthy. Lena's story reminds us that holding onto one's principles doesn't mean rejecting love, but rather inspiring that love to rise to a higher standard. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. It's a narrative designed to explore deep emotional themes and character growth in a dramatic context. If this story resonated with you, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more content like this, and sharing it with someone who appreciates a story of transformation and second chances. Now for our question of the day. When Damon bought the entire shoe boutique, did you see it as a romantic gesture or a terrifying display of power? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And finally, we want to know what you'd like to see next. Should our next story focus on A. Marco, the loyal second-in-command, as he finds an unexpected love of his own while navigating the new, legitimate Volkov Corp? B. Chloe, the supportive best friend who accidentally gets entangled with a rival of Damon's, forcing her to choose between loyalty and a dangerous attraction. Vote A or B in the comments to help us decide our next story. Thank you for watching.